This is actually the first event I think ever held in this room for the building. So a pardon for the apologies for the construction work. Hopefully they won't make any noise above us. That's been a journey at our office. And hopefully it was fairly easy to find everything. My name is GP McClear. I'm the director of the Upstate Mobility Alliance, which is an initiative of 10 at the top. And in late spring of this year, 10 at the top hosted our Upstate Planners Group, which are the professional planners at the city and county levels from across the Upstate to talk about growth in the region. We had a lot of great conversation, and one of them that kind of popped up almost unexpectedly was electric vehicle charging. One of the planners, I think, from the city of Travelers Rest asked a question about it, and Mike Rue at Duke Energy had the burden of carrying most of that conversation. And so I thought we thought it'd be great to break that conversation out a little bit and talk about EV infrastructure in the Upstate, what's on the horizon, and particularly for our communities to think through what do we need to be thinking about as this market continues to grow in our state and in our country. I'm going to turn to our panelists first real quick for some introductions. If y'all wouldn't mind passing the mic you got down the line and introducing yourself and where you're coming from today.
Sure. My name is Mark Rue. I'm on the state line down in Charlotte. We did that one meeting. Was asked to come back and speak a little bit more about the work we do in the space, and I got the opportunity. Things go over my head. I've got resources left to go back. I've been 30+ years, first on the generation side, working in permitting. Good afternoon. My name is Mike McCauley. I'm with Watershed Consulting Group based in Columbia, South Carolina, and I'm here on behalf of the South Carolina Electric Transportation Network. So we'll know a little bit more about that later, probably. But my firm works with Network and its members to help advise on federal and city funding opportunities in the electric transportation space and beyond, in multiple other sectors as well. And so we work with communities, private and public clients across South Carolina and South Carolina. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ben Hesser. I'm manager of public policy for a company called ChargePoint. We're an electric vehicle charging designer, manufacturer, and network operator here in the United States and internationally. We have an office located in Greenville off Main Street. So prior to this job, I actually worked in the South Carolina Energy Office, and I'm at the Clean Fuels Coalition for 3.5 years. Came up from Columbia today, but recently moved to Virginia, so still around here. But I'll pass it over.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, GP, for having us here today. My name is Rob Degenbaugh. I'm the Director of Engineering Support for South Carolina Department of Transportation. I'm also handling our EV charging program. I'm going to share some information with y'all later today, help you get up to speed on that. So welcome. It's a pleasure to get an opportunity to speak with y'all.
Thank y'all. So we have some questions for the panelists. We're gonna talk about some of the drivers on driving the growth behind EVs in this state and beyond. We're gonna have a little bit more of a hyper local lens on this for South Carolina. Just giving you guys a little bit of rundown of the agenda in case you haven't noticed. Some considerations for charging stations themselves, and then considerations for community planning. And then we'll end with money, because that's typically everyone's question. So we'll end with the answer, hopefully. In the middle of it, we'll actually have Rob will talk a little bit about the state's NEVI program, which is part of the money, but he'll go through that as well. And at the end, we'll have time for Q&A, but we also have some light refreshments. It's hot outside. You can grab a cold one or water. We have some food as well, just to kind of have a chance to network to close out the day. So I'll go ahead and get started. For this one is for all of y'all to answer. Rob, you got the mic, so you get to go first. from your vantage point at DOT, why is the conversation around EV infrastructure growing so much in South Carolina? What's the landscape like from where you're sitting?
Electric vehicle growth in the state is increasing substantially. We have a group that is formed with the governor's blessing, interagency working group. And South Carolina Department of Motor Vehicles is part of that group. So they keep us informed on data metrics on the growth of electric vehicles in the state, and we're here to say, and very popular. Their demand is increasing, so are people's purchase power to go out and secure them. One thing we're doing at SCDOT is try to facilitate charging to support that network with some federal funds that are dedicated. Exciting time.
Ben?
Like Rob said, I think the market's wanting and demanding. We're seeing growth, especially here in South Carolina, 50% year-over-year, and that's the same picture across the Southeast, the same 50% rate growth year-over-year. So the market wants it. I think there's great opportunities for communities to get into economic investment, to upgrade their communities with this infrastructure, charging to draw people in, and spend their money right in these communities, and add to that factor of amenity. So I think that's where a lot of opportunity, at least in the state, is coming from. And then you mentioned about the executive actions and what's happening at the state level. The SCDOT, the SC Energy Office, Department of Commerce are all engaged in this ecosystem strategy to draw in suppliers and businesses here. So a lot of energy. No fun.
Well, I absolutely agree with my colleagues that the opportunities and the energy behind the electric transportation space in South Carolina is moving forward pace. And I think it's for all those reasons, it is absolutely market talking. Who's parking parking lot, there was a Ford Lightning park right in front of us. And I like to put the market question into context with things, because the Ford Lightning commercial a couple Super Bowls ago, that was not because of a political agenda. Those ads cost a fortune. Ford paid for that ad time because the market is seeking, that particular product, and they chose to put it there. I do think, the demand and the structure, that's what we're here to talk about today, right? It's how the consumer demand can be met through the infrastructure, and how we pay for it all. And so I do think some of the demand that we see now and the changes in the industry is also intentional in some ways. Some of the policy behind the moves that the federal government and the state government that may have policy rationale behind. And I'm sure we'll touch on some of that today, but certainly from a federal perspective, with the infrastructure law, which we'll probably touch on more in a bit, helping to provide some of that federal funding for charging infrastructure, but then some of the additional legislation that has become law, which has taken steps in the infrastructure law, just to make it all that we thought to tell us, has required companies like Benz to change their production and what they're focusing on. But similarly, in terms of making Buy America requirements, by requiring fast chargers and other incentives through other pieces of legislation are also what are driving some of the major economic development, being among the biggest the state has ever seen. It is contributing to that, along with what makes South Carolina unique: our incredible workforce, our automotive traditions, our everything South Carolina has offered from the college system and workforce development and beach mountains is all this. agree 100% with all they don't say. But Duke Energy operates, its gas and electric operations in 6 jurisdictions. And we've seen, past several years accelerating in adoption of the vehicles. Primarily, of course, this I'm talking really on the light duty vehicle side. Initially, it's happening in urban areas, but then with programs like that, we hear more about, that interest has spread into the rural areas. And plus, another thing that's helped interesting, to expand larger batteries to kind of ease weight inside folks being scared about being scared in some place. And then even the software, and tell folks where the nearest charging station is. So that helps to go over and ease that anxiety, which was competitive adoption.
So for ChargePoint and Dukes, I guess if you want to hold the mic, Mike. You both of your companies cover multiple states. Is the landscape similar in the other states that you serve?
South Carolina is a little bit different. There, with the governor's executive order, there's been a lot of interest on working towards improving the supply chain and supporting industries to help with the adoption. A little bit slower on the actual getting some programs through. We've got several programs to talk about later that are specific for commissions. So it's a little bit slower here, but we're still accelerating, slowly, but compared to some other jurisdictions, a little bit behind.
Ben?
Yeah, I'll echo those comments by Dave. Looking across the region, it's very competitive. You got Georgia, you got Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, even, all just competing for first in this region in terms of EV manufacturing for auto manufacturers, but then the infrastructure. And so we see a lot of states getting out programs that you're saying at the commission. So, there's utility funding incentives that are out there. Obviously, like you said, who pays for it is a great long-winded answer, and possibly we may never agree. But, these things do have to be worked out through these processes that will then expand infrastructure. We're also seeing things such as state policy to advance fleet electrification, like you mentioned. You serve North Carolina. There's been a big push by the North Carolina administration to get out electric fleet trucks, especially in the manufacturing sector where you have all the auto manufacturers and tech producers. And then also, I think the other thing is state funding programs. Alabama has a great program that I think South Carolina can emulate that's really driven by the Commerce Department and investing in communities to add tourist attractions and how can they add on as well EV charging or innovative amenities to these programs to incorporate EV infrastructure. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, but to that point, South Carolina is really up there with the executive order. But again, it's a very competitive environment for us.
So for Mike McCauley, then let's jump to policy for a minute. Governor McMaster, as we mentioned, has taken a number of executive actions. Can you unpack those a little bit for everybody and talk about the impacts they're having?
Absolutely, and I'll use this as a segue just to put in a plug for the South Carolina Electric Transportation Network because it helps inform how it came to be and what it is now. So previously, the South Carolina General Assembly had passed a law with a series of mandates, including charging both the South Carolina House and Senate to stand up the joint committee focused on electric transportation. It also charged Ben's former employer at the Energy Office, or the LRS Office for Regulatory Staff, in which the Energy Office is housed, to conduct a stakeholder process and engage with folks like people at the stable and folks like you and many others to understand what this process and sort of conversion and transition to electric vehicles and electric transportation generally would entail. They led a robust year-long process with multiple working groups and committees, that culminated in a report that was issued last year. And it contains many sort of what I would call evergreen recommendations, things that while some of the funding or some of the particular programs may change, there are a number of sort of core things to keep in mind, as this work unfolds. And so with that context in mind, when the stakeholder process ended, literally within a matter of weeks, Congress passed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is a $1.2 trillion law. That's roughly the equivalent of the budget of the Pentagon, to push dollars out to the states. About 60% of those dollars are formula dollars, which means agencies like Rob and others can accept those dollars and put them to work within some parameters set. But then roughly 40% of that 1.2 trillion would come in the form of competitive grants, and for which the state, as well as regional and local governments, are often eligible to pursue in all our spare time, right? And so, so there were these big funding opportunities and this series of evergreen recommendations that were set without the context of these new, frankly, almost generational laws and funding opportunities. And so in early last year, some members of that stakeholder process, with the blessing of the Energy Office, stood up a new network. It's really unbranded. It is not or is owned by any one entity. It is facilitated by staffers and conservation voters of South Carolina, but it is open to any and all, public, private, and they're all pretty well represented, academic institutions, suppliers. It's really a wide ranging organization, but it quickly grew almost overnight from like 0 to over 100 members. And it meets monthly via Zoom, and there's a website and social media, and it's really just a convene for folks to share what they're working on, to share best practices, for different funders to share funding opportunities, and for other stakeholders to communicate. And so Rob has joined us several times and shared updates. The State Department of Education has come to talk about electric school buses, for which they receive funding. Just to give a few examples, back when we met just last week, the State Department of Employment and Workforce presented on workforce issues that they had been passed by the governor. So that'll be my segue to the governor's executive order, which did 3 main things. It did lots of things, but 3 general takeaways are: number 1, it charged Rob's agency, SCDOT, with standing up the interagency working group on EVs, which he's made reference. And so those are representatives from state agencies who convene monthly to look at the state of play and to make decisions and recommendations, I'm sure. And then it also charged the State Department of Commerce with establishing a one-stop shop for entities inside and outside of South Carolina that are looking to make investments and to stand up activities in the state to have a point of contact. And so the State Department of Commerce is leading that effort. And then finally, as I just referenced, it charged the State Department of Employment and Workforce to essentially do a survey, not a real survey per se, although they met with numerous stakeholders, but to sort of take the temperature of what the workforce market looks like, what directions things are heading in with existing workforce, with anticipating future workforce needs, what and how our institutions of higher learning are preparing, and other workforce development opportunities. And so I believe that report will be coming soon. from June, as they're called. So that was, part of the governor's, executive order, and he has since, issued another one specifically relating to energy, which, of course, touches on, anything around electrification, and so there are some connections there as well, but, one, that I sort of referenced, was almost entirely about EVs and it's helped drive, a lot of activities you'll hear us talk about today.
And in a second, Rob's gonna talk about their work, particularly in the NEVI program. But Mike, for Duke, these obviously have. I know if we jump the gun a little, that's okay. But these obviously have energy implications if the state is looking to at least shine a light on EVs. Have these policies impacted? How have they impacted Duke on a surface level?
Yeah. Duke is always finding what they can as far as planning out to figure out this this type of participating growth. So, we're ready for it.
Great. Rob, do you want to talk a little bit about the working group and your NEVI program? And if you want to start by talking about the working group, we'll pull up your slides.
But Mike, as Mike mentioned, the governor's executive order established 3 different programs, one of which our SCDOT formed the governor's interagency working group. I'm going to put a link up here shortly. It's a QR code, and I'll take you to all of that information. It's all archived and available online. We meet monthly. There's a meeting this Friday. We post a live stream link on our website, and we bring in a series of industry representatives, not individual companies, but industry representatives to share perspectives. So in lieu of trying to bring in, say, individual gas station owners, we bring in petroleum associations so they can speak on behalf of their industry. And it keeps our group informed as we're starting to work the SCDOT sanction unit. And that's really the goal of the interagency work group, is to make sure all the government agencies are on the same page before we take one step forward and we're not pulling the road in a different direction. And personally, I've seen it starting to gel. There's a lot of strong relationship and friendship being formed through this group, so that once we start to put assets on the ground, we're all going to be unified and where those assets go, how they're managed. And ultimately, the goal is to make sure those EV chargers do not become stranded assets in that area at all. Because this is what we're tasked with managing is a substantial amount of taxpayer money. And we want to make sure that it's applied in a relevant manner that helps the private sector and society accomplish goals. So go ahead.
You can take control if you want to take control.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Yeah. So this QR code, if you just scan it with the camera app on your phone, it'll take you to our NEVI website for SCDOT. And for those of you that aren't familiar with acronyms, I'm going to throw one at you today, and it's NEVI, N-E-V-I. That is the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure, NEVI formula program. And as Mike alluded to earlier, that's just a really long name for a pot of federal money that has been delegated to SCDOT to make sure that we apply it in an appropriate manner to expand EV charging on a national and regional level. So I'm going to explain a little bit more about the details of that without going too deep, but go to this website. I'll also have that QR code up at the end of the presentation so you can scan it if you did not get an opportunity. If you want to learn more about NEVI, driveelectric.gov is an excellent website. This presentation can be shared to any and all afterwards, so please feel free to email it out. There are a tremendous amount of resources to help you understand the funding opportunities, but also the federal regulations and policies that go along with these funds. So, federal money, some people will say it comes with strings attached, and it's really, those strings are to make sure that everything is done in a fair and equitable manner. Now, you don't want folks running around with taxpayer funds, just cherry picking who they spend it with and what communities they drop those funds in. So our task at SCDOT is to make sure we follow those equity rules and those federal rules to make sure it's put in place appropriately. Big picture perspective, the goal through the entire national NEVI program is to have 500,000 chargers by 2030 out on the street. Now, that should immediately kind of throw a light bulb off in your mind that NEVI is not going to be the savior for the EV world. Okay, it's the private sector entities that are represented here today are going to step up and play a big role, a more major role in filling those needs that state government will. But we're going to do our part to particularly jumpstart EV charging in areas where maybe private sector is not incentivized as much because of profit. There might be a less appealing area. Could be in a rural area or possibly a disadvantaged area where the profit margins may not be quite as appealing, but that's where these NEVI formula funds can come in as seed money to help incentivize those EV chargers going out into those areas so that we complement the large urban hubs and what those urban hubs are going to have resource-wise. We also fill the gap in the rural holes in between them. Alternative fuel corridors, those are called AFCs. That is a federal requirement that we spend our money initially on the alternative fuel corridors. Now, in this state, those are the interstates. So keeps it very simple for us. We assign those in partnership with the state energy office. They are actually the champion and owner of those designations, and they consult with us. So from a strategic perspective, we have not blasted a tremendous number of routes out as AFCs in our state, because once we certify that our interstate is built out, we then have a tremendous amount of flexibility to use those NEVI funds off of the interstate, which I'll be able to, I think, discuss a little bit more later. So once we build out the interstates, which is probably going to be around 13 to 15 DC fast charging locations, we can then take the remainder of the funds and go deeper into the communities, which is what we're excited about. We want to get this money out further into these areas. I mentioned an emphasis on rural locations. That is not arbitrary, because we are very confident in urban hubs that there's going to be a lot of interest from private sector to put charging in those locations because of the high amount of turnover and the profit availability. We know that those will be enticing to private sector firms, but we want to get it out in these rural locations where we can fill in the gaps and help solve the range anxiety issues. So if you've ever driven an EV, if you own an EV, range anxiety is real, and we want to do our part to help fill in those gaps so it's not such a miserable experience. And I alluded earlier, it's important for y'all to recognize once the Secretary of Transportation for USDOT certifies on a national level that we built out our AFC, the remaining funds can then go on other roads. Like, say, think of US 17, US 501, 378, US 25, and all these one arterial routes around our state that move a lot of people, and could also benefit from EV charging. Money. $70 million over 5 years is South Carolina's allotment of the NEVI fund. So there's a $5 billion pot of money nationally doled out between the states. Of that, South Carolina gets $70 billion. And one thing that's been a very helpful to us is there's no expiration date on the fund. So while we are not dragging our feet, we are not trying to slow pedal this thing, we also do not want to rush it to failure. And we appreciate everybody's patience and understanding as we build this this alliance of state agencies so we can overcome some state policy that maybe are a little antiquated and need to be addressed.
before we go wholesale into this. And also so that the left hand and the right hand are working together to complement initiatives such as what the Department of Energy is doing, Department of Education is doing with school bus initiatives. We want to be part of that at SCDOT. We want to complement those and not trample all over them. So not having an expiration date is very important to us so that we have time to build alliances. And then when we hit the go button, it's going to be very quick and it's going to be very fast because we will have taken the time to listen to the stakeholders, people in this audience. There are going to be future opportunities for you to participate either virtually or in person with a whole series of charrettes and meetings around the state. And we're going to combine that with what the Energy Office has already done through their stakeholder initiatives to ultimately formulate a plan. And this is just a sample picture. This has charge points. I've shout out to my panelists.
I'm surprised.
So while we are not aligning ourselves with a particular proprietary device right now, I want you to understand that the NEVI funds are targeting this type of charge. This DC fast charge. It's 150 kilowatts or greater. Part of our discussion is to make sure what we put out is relevant, and we're having internal conversations. Is 150 kilowatts appropriate? You know, is it going to be antiquated in 2 months, 2 weeks, right? 2 years. And so the federal government has that minimum requirement of 150 kilowatts, but nothing prohibits us from going higher than that with what we ultimately install and put in place. So this type of charging is what NEVI's going after, not the level 2 chargers that you would use at your home, or, you know, and certainly not the level 1s that come in the trunk of your car if you buy an EV. Now, the technical details, no more than 50 mile spacing on the alternative fuel corridor. We want to make sure that these sites are spread out no more than 50 miles apart and no more than 1 mile off the interstate. So immediately, that should give y'all a picture in your mind of where these things will be. Think about what's within 1 mile of the interstate, you know, at next. NACS Plug, right? You know, you can see things like this around an interstate. And we're going to be partnering with private sector entities to put this charging in relevant places that are safe, accessible, and have the kind of amenities and accommodations that drivers want. You know, a lot of folks say, well, just put them in SCDOT right away. Our right away is boring. It's very functional, right? It's very tight. We do not buy land that accommodates people parking and spending a lot of time. Little tidbit, we cannot put them at rest areas on the interstate because of federal law prohibits us from doing that. We can't put things out there that create revenue. There's only one exception, the Commission for the Deaf and Blind. Can't operate soda machines and the snack machines through an actual waiver, but we can't do things like that in the state. If you travel up north, some of their rest areas are actually private. They'll be on private facilities, and you'll see McDonald's and gas stations and things. But for the most part, the rest areas around the country are not eligible because of federal prohibition. And you know, quite frankly, I'm not sure if the driver is going to want to spend 30 minutes in a rest area in South Carolina. You know, they have bathrooms and a couple of vending machines, and not exactly the kind of place you want to hang out for 20 or 30 minutes. So, yeah, fire away.
Thank you. What kind of power facilities do you need to provide them? Okay, I mean, is that also a criteria that you're looking at as far as in a mile? What do you need?
Yeah, well, to answer your question, our siting, so when we decide where these sites can go, we're going to be working with our partners at Duke Energy, Dominion, Santee Cooper, Lockhart Power, and numerous co-ops around the state to make sure that they have the infrastructure capacity to serve it. But if you kind of go to the next bullet here, you'll see it's not just 150 kilowatts, it's 4 times 150 is the NEVI requirement for sites. Think of it as a quad pod. That's what some people call it. It's 4 DC fast chargers, each capable of independently putting out 150 kilowatts. We are not going to size these things to the NACS behind. So to answer your question, think about transformers. We're probably looking at a megawatt transformer. Might have the capacity to not only meet the current need, but also the future need. And a megawatt transformer is something that would power on Walmart. Okay, so it gives you some perspective. NEVI formula funds can actually be used to purchase those transformers in a reasonable amount of the prepaid line that would be needed to serve that bill. Now, we're not going to go fund 10 or 12 miles of prepaid line to the site. Obviously, we want to partner with utility companies in locations that are already fairly set up, fairly reasonably ready to handle that amount of electricity draw, and then supplement with the things that they were the switches, the transformers, and those other things that'll be necessary to power the site. So yeah, we're not just building for today, we want to build for the future and make sure that we have conduit, wiring, the resources in place in the ground. So if we decide to do a 250 kilowatt fast charger and it gets lapped in 2 years, it can be upgraded to a 350. That becomes interesting.
When you refer to
Yeah.
top, you mean the something like ATM information, benefits, spending or charges?
Well, and let me kind of clarify one thing. DOT will not make a penny off these charges. So let me clarify that. So we will not make 1 cent off this. We want the private sector to make money. Right? We know that they're going to be the ones tasked with hosting them, operating them, and maintaining them. So in terms of when I talk about profit, when the EV charging sites are identified, those host locations, whether that's a McDonald's parking lot, a gas station parking lot, a hotel parking lot, that private entity has the ability to make money off of not only having a customer sitting there for 30 minutes and they go inside their store to buy amenities, but also someone is going to provide electricity to that charger, and that entity we expect them to make money. It's not going to be a gratis service. So the federal government's program is not going to provide free electricity for EV chargers. There are controls in place with NEVI to make sure that profit market stays very fair and equitable and does not get out of control. But absolutely, there will be profit, just not from us, but from host sites, potentially with that peripheral activity from a driver, and then whoever providing the electricity
and potentially the equipment. So right now, the CCS type 1 is the standard charger for NEVI. But the good thing is, the Federal Highway Administration, SCDOT, they are also looking at these non-proprietary flow types, such as if I'm saying it right, SCDOT, I've heard it different, CHAdeMO, the NACS, those are coming online as valid pipes that we can use these federal funds to pay for. So the NACS Plug, the old Tesla type shape, those are now eligible for the NEVI formula funds as long as we have our 4 CCS type funds. So the 4 CCS, that's the baseline expectation. But if we want to also add adapters or additional plugs, we can use these non-proprietary types. This presentation will go out. This FAQ section has some great stuff for y'all. So click on it. That's straight from Federal Highway Administration. Very factual and updated. Now, in terms of, I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because I don't want to take up much more time up here. But I mentioned equity and as a huge component of this. There's an initiative called Justice 40 that we're going to be obligated to meet with these federal funds. It does not mean that 40% of the money goes to a disadvantaged business enterprise. But what it does mean is that of that 70 million, we got to prove that 40% of that benefited the disadvantaged community. Job growth. That's one thing we're really hoping and targeting through training, partnership with the college system, service, installation, operation, maintenance of these devices. We certainly hope that that's going to be a big part in that, but this map tool, if you click on this link, it's very eye-opening because it shows a lot of this, well, it shows all the disadvantaged communities in South Carolina. And it's very humbling to think that there are people in our state that live in places that have to drive 40+ minutes just to get to the grocery store, right? So if you don't have transportation independence, you're in a big, you're quite a mess. So maybe it's not going to fix that, it's not going to solve it, but hopefully it will provide transportation alternatives for people that will help bridge that gap. And, I mentioned how do we plan to accomplish our equity goals through this. This just kind of recaps some of the points I talked about, but I want to touch quickly on resilience, electric vehicles and their role in having a resilient transportation system. The fuel prices, fuel availability is very volatile, right? Sometimes, especially during evacuation, hurricane events. So certainly we hope that our EV charging network is going to be in place and strategically support evacuation during natural disaster. We want that as a goal. We want folks to be able to charge the vehicle if they're evacuating, particularly the coast during hurricanes. But as y'all are very familiar here in the upstate, we get these backdoor hurricanes that come out of the Gulf. They just did it, even the upstate with a tremendous amount of rain where I remember sitting through any advice where those hurricanes are coming in the back door and you have a kind of a emergency team at DOT and we're trying to figure out how to evacuate bullets because of a hurricane. Wow, like who would have thought, right? It's there's a home football game and we're like, how do we get all these people out of there if 12 inches of rain inundates them in an hour or two? So resilience is important. Go to this QR code. You can find out a whole lot more about the Interagency EV Working Group and what we're doing at SCDOT to complement NEVI. And inform the program, and we're going to do some things with the design of some of our sites to make them conducive for larger wheelbase vehicles, be able to pull in the charge so that we don't have, we're not going to have all pull-in parking spaces like you normally see. Parking spaces. We saw them that allow, the board lighting with the boat behind it, pull through, and also the occasional large trailer. Now, meeting with the freight industry and South Carolina Trucking Association, it was very humbling to me that most of the trucking in this state is from mom and popper that will not build it. Okay, that's just the reality. I'm not here to advocate one way or the other, but the cost and feasibility of electrifying the large freight delivery network is just it's very challenging. Not only is it very expensive, but the weight of the batteries, that 12 to 15,000 pound range, that takes a lot of their cargo carrying capability away, as well as the weight. So the logistics of the freight are not something we're trying to tackle. We met with a local trucking company that's affiliated with BMW with their site, and it was pretty amazing when you install a megawatt EV fast charger for a truck, and you plug that truck in, you will get attention at a power plant. Okay, fine. If you have 3 of those and you plug all 3, it will definitely get some attention. So not that the grid is not set up to handle that, it's just from a freight standpoint, it's not really the driving force, at least in this state. Mass transit is absolutely our Department of Education is kind of leading the country in electrification of fleet. It's managed on a state level instead of a district level, so it's a lot more logistically easy for them to electrify their fleet than it's managed by one entity. There are several municipalities that have electrified their fleet. Those are very conducive to electrification because they have very controlled routes that typically don't go very far. So the great candidates for electrification. But not our primary target. But what we will do will be accessible to them at some locations. So
if they need to access some electricity.
Hopefully, we're gonna have one or two sites along a corridor where a pull-through vehicle can access that.
But to address your question though, you know, like Ben said, in the normal DC charging clusters, you know, they're about like low comparable to a box store, And, we are concerned about, say, you know, building load for, say, Amazon. You know, Amazon trucks, and UPS, and they want to go. So we had conversations ongoing with those folks. So that not so much necessarily in South Carolina, say in Charlotte area, where you've got a large public vehicle. That's a challenge. And then we have to go over and, you know, design especially for them to accommodate that kind of load. You know, for instance, those transformers that supply that track power are not off the shelf by items. 12 to 18 months to be able to get them. So, you know, it takes a lot of planning to look at that kind of work. That's not what we're talking about. Really, we're talking about light vehicles.
How fast can it charge my golf cart?
And just to jump in though, while the NEVI program is focused on light duty infrastructure, there is other programs in EPA and the USDOT that will reduce emissions at port facilities with heavy duty trucks. And I think you were saying it, right, it's not everyone's going to go electric, but when the use case fits. And so like you're saying, the medium trucks is the last mile of the drainage, the short haul vehicles that do less than 200 miles a day are perfect candidate. But if you're driving from Charleston up to Greenville, you might as well use that nice rail line.
Well, Ben, we'll keep it with you for a second. We talked about where some of these, when you think about state policy, where these things can go. Talk about right sizing the charger for your organization. So if we're community planners or we're corporate entities here and we're thinking through questions maybe along our interstates and recruitment or things like that, what should companies or organizations be thinking about if they want to try to implement chargers? Maybe not even on the NEVI scale per se, but chargers in general.
Yeah, so I think it all goes to use case, dwell time. How long is someone going to be in the parking lot? So, you know, the NEVI program, that's really focused on getting people on interstate corridors, right, across states. And so with that, you're talking about, you know, the DC fast chargers, but, you know, also are colloquially known as level 3 chargers, 20 to 30 minute fast charging vehicles. So as you think about that, you know, fueling convenience retailers, maybe a Sam's Club, maybe a Chick-fil-A, maybe a McDonald's, right? Those are the type of businesses you think of when you're doing fast charging. You're going to be in and out. You want people in your store spending money while also getting charged. Well, places like here in these types of commercial establishments where you might be here for 8 hours a day, right? A level 2 charger that might take a few more hours would be a better suited option, as well as a lower tax on your grid, right? 40 amps, 7 kilowatt, really not that big of a deal. Same thing as your laundry machine, but it can charge your car in about 5 to 6 hours. So I think it really depends on what your business is trying to do, you know, whether you're a bank, whether you're an office building or a fueling convenience store. I think it all depends on how long your customer's in there. And with that, think of, you know, we talked about the nearby power, right? Somebody asked if, you know, you need 3-phase power or a large transformer. You know, if you're thinking about these DC level 3 installations, yes, you're going to need 3-phase 480 volt power, but otherwise, you know, you're looking at regular 240 volt installation. So think about nearby power, think about what partnerships are also within your community that you can benefit from, whether it's a park that maybe you can co-establish a charger with to draw more people in, or maybe it's a local market or something like that. We've got some great stores in North Carolina that actually have really increase their foot traffic by putting chargers outside of the local restaurants. So there's great opportunities there. And I think the other thing is think about accessibility. Like you said, what type of vehicles will be able to charge there, what types of people, you know, in terms of whether they're wheelchairs or, you know, physically disabled. Think about those things as well, because there's a lot of accessibility requirements. So if you have already existing ADA paths, it's always cheaper to integrate into those than to tear up another partnership. So there are a lot of things to consider. Obviously, happy to talk to you more about.
Well, it's fine. I think, yeah, Dean.
I have a question about
have there been, businesses that you work with that have used having chargers as an employee incentive for their employees, you know, to during the day to be able to charge because they know they have electric vehicles, that kind of thing. Have you seen that?
Yeah, and we do it personally in our office here in Greenville for chargers. But I'm just pointing out one industry, the healthcare industries, a really great example, doctors love their Teslas, they want to plug in while they're doing surgery apparently. And so it's a great amenity, to keep, your staff happy, right? As another thing, maybe it replaces the police department, right? I think it's a good element to keep people attracted, sustainability as well for your company, so that you care about the environment. So yeah.
About
Yeah.
potential like, apartment building, condo, townhome, people that own, electric vehicles there, and, they want to charge them, but they don't have electric power running from the house out to the parking lot.
Yeah, and so that's a really interesting issue, and that would be level 2 chargers, right? Overnight charging, 40 amps, right? It's not a big lift to get that infrastructure done, but it is when you don't own, right, a physical asset that you're trying to get work done. And so that does present a lot of problems for tenants. That's an issue we're trying to work across the country. Yeah, and so so there's policies out there. Florida has one, Virginia, that are called right to charge, which allow you to enter into a legal agreement or negotiation with your HOA to say you would pay for it. Yeah, it could be individual, it could be association, you could get a group of folks together who own parking spots. But in South Carolina, there is no definite legal pathway other than just asking your landlord. Unfortunately, they tell you no, there's no recourse here in South Carolina. So something we are trying to work on. But I think it does play to, what the utilities do with their incentives that I think are needed in South Carolina, where they will actually pay, right, to build out that infrastructure. As a utility, it's, in their vested interest to provide reliable infrastructure, electrical infrastructure for you to fund that.
Yes.
They want to have stations here, they just contact, out.
I think it's that, and
I know a little bit more than that, but.
Well,
I think, if you haven't reached out to your HOA already, I think that's starting place, and then from there, utility, I think, might be, current.
yes, ma'am. You had your hand up first.
And a lot of those little areas, and even some of the areas in the city, certainly, people still have music. And they don't have service. So how do you propose to deal with expanding into those rural areas when you have that sort of structure in place that's, it's an obstruction to what it is you want to do. And then secondly, talking about parking, safety concerns are very important, based on where those parking complexes or employees are located. And if you look on next door, you see the break-ins and cars and things of that nature. So, how do you deal with those safety issues around these charging stations?
To answer your first question, the NEVI formula funds are not going to be applied in residential homes. And so, that's not going to be a logistical issue that we're going to face, because we're going to be building these DC fast chargers at publicly accessible locations. Now, being alluded to earlier, the level 2 chargers that would probably be more appropriate for home application. That's going to require an electrician to come in and do some upgrades. Right? It's not an easy peasy process where you just plug and play and go. And concerning safety, part of the target, at least for the NEVI program, is to put these in well-lit, publicly accessible places so that people do feel safe stopping at all hours of the day and night to spend 20 or 30 minutes. I'll let others, if they have just some thoughts about safety in terms of their
What would the Justice 40 Act deal with the home use?
No, ma'am, like the federal funds are not gonna be doled out to individuals. Those will be doled out as a couple different programs. One is a charging and fueling infrastructure grant program that, communities can chase. But it's not gonna be an eligible install and put it in someone's home. That's gonna be on the resident, right? It's gonna be on that individual. Yeah,
If
for,
you're dealing with that issue.
right, if it's at a public park, that's a perfectly valid place for a municipality to pursue some of the grant funds that, that would, could be applied back to that community, but maybe, with the target being interstates, we won't be reaching very deep into the community. And even, once we certify those interstates, I don't see us getting down deep into the residential setting. It's gonna be more of a corridor basis, or it might be a route like US 25 or US 501, where we have one of these hubs so people can use.
Yes, sir, you had yours and then. Yes, sir. Yeah.
What question? Okay, are there any grants, subsidies, financial incentives available to condo owners like the zero storms?
So, as my colleagues have referenced, from a federal funding perspective, they are prepared to fund projects that will serve the public. So there are incentives that are offered to communities and to private sector, and for example, vendors who could do some of this work, but not like on scale of an individual sort of multi-family residence, for example. However, some utilities offer programs and incentives for their customers, but those vary by utility provider. And so, I would encourage you to engage or someone who is interested in that, to consider calling their utility provider. The state energy office, we'll talk more about funding, I think, here in a few minutes, but the state energy office also gets funding from the federal government to offer various programs to try to meet communities and people where they're at and what their needs are. Some of those are pending approval from the federal government right now, and so I'm not able to make news on their behalf, but as I'll touch on in a bit, I think we can expect some of those to have electric transportation applications.
We're currently considering an EV charging project for 30 chargers. We anticipate the load to be about 40 kilowatts initially, and then about 700 kilowatts in 2 years. Is there a value of being able to load curtail a single source? Not have smart chargers. You can program the charge at a different level at different times. Is there a dollar value to have that?
Right.
That have not been approved, that don't fund potential, owners in the building that can make ready for competitive work. How some of that works. But there's a couple of things we've got forward that we're looking at. Now we do have it has been approved by up to 60 DC has started at 30 different locations. They about 5.
Yeah.
I'll touch on it. I think that is critical, and we're just talking about hardware, but there's another component of software. It's better. And having energy management software I think is really important because you can split power at the circuit breaker level, you can split it at the panel, or even at the charger level. And so, you know, not everyone, right? The average driver drives 30, 40 miles a day in America. It's different across states, right? But, you know, say you have a 250-mile battery, you're only using 25% of the battery per day. And so you don't need full available charge everything. So I would highly recommend looking at it.
Yes, sir. And then we're going to jump back to some other questions.
And that's the Secretary of Transportation for USDOT. And that's kind of a formality because basically federal highways will certify the federal interstate. Now that will be a build out. Right now, we are in a procurement process to hire a consultant that's going to help us identify our candidate sites ultimately by hosting stakeholder engagement and doing the data analysis to help us select the sites. We anticipate that's going to take about a year from now. And then we will be in a position to start procuring the equipment to install the chargers. So several years before the AFCs would be built out, and we would then be ready to go on the non-interstate guys.
And then, are you looking for, private entities that are in place that can track you with the chargers yet? Or are y'all interested in partnering as a staff?
Well, with the NEVI funds, we're not going to be building restrooms, amenities, and things like that. Those are not eligible. So it's going to be the chargers and some of the infrastructure necessary for that. There's conversations about whether lighting and solar panels, things like that are eligible, but it's going to be very much targeted on the EV charging infrastructure itself. So we're not going to be looking to go to a site that is not ready or compatible for those other amenities such as the safety, the security, the lighting. That's right. And in terms of how we deliver the program, you know, some states, they actually incentivize through funding to try to encourage places that have those amenities to step up and provide those services and provide the drinks, the snacks, the bathrooms, things like that. We haven't committed on a delivery mechanism yet, but I'm very comfortable saying that we're going to be looking at partnering with some sort of private entity to serve as a host site for these EV chargers, which would be amenable to the public.
My next question is really for anyone who wants to take it, but I think Mike Rue with Duke, I want to start with you. We talked a little bit about these power considerations, but from a land planning standpoint, if I'm a city planner or a community planner, what do I need to be thinking about when it comes to EV infrastructure, do you think? Sorry, I know that wasn't necessarily assigned to you, but you've been talking a lot about it, so.
Good question.
I guess here's a technical question for as an example. Do existing Duke right-of-ways accommodate the amount of power infrastructure you may need in some of these areas? Like, are you guys also going to be having to expand existing right-of-ways to expand EV charging?
Specifically to accommodate any additional letter.
Okay.
You know, we think that, you know, we try to do a detailed look ahead. We believe that we can do it with our plan. And one thing that we try to be very measured in how we develop our plans going forward is that, you know, we want to build something and have to go back in 2 to 5 years and rebuild it. So, you know, we take the time to go over and figure out try to determine what those future needs will be and make sure that we've got the infrastructure there that we can accommodate those future loads. It's a little bit small, I think, that the state is growing so fast, but that's, you know, what we can do.
So speaking of growth, and any, I guess whoever Ben might be all right for this one too. Sorry, Ben or Rob, or they're all just there's so many experts up here. I don't know who to throw it to. I had this question for Mike Rube originally, but I think Ben, you've hit on some of it. For residential use, what do we think city and county planners need to think about when we're talking about a new neighborhood being built and the developer would like to talk about electric vehicle infrastructure? When we talk about the user, to your point earlier, ma'am, what does the individual have to be thinking about, or the builder have to be thinking about?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and like you said, the state has changed so rapidly, and so the country, right, with all these auto OEMs signaling we're gonna be producing electric vehicles in the next few years today. So I'll break this down into two things, one being the building planning, and then the other being the permitting side of it. So one, I think planners really need to put some thought into what our community will look like in, say 5 years, right? And these look like EV ready buildings, in the sense that houses or structures that are built today should have the available capacity to serve level 2 residential electric vehicle charging. And this, when you're talking about rebuilding, breaking it up into 5 years, we've seen costs of fivefold difference in terms of what it means for new construction versus retrofit when building out electrical capacity. I see you've probably done the research and seen the same staggering numbers, but it's $5,000 project compared to a $1,000 project if you do that concept. So I think incorporating building codes within whether it's a zoning ordinance or whether it's in the building actual planning code is important. And this might just look like a certain percentage of a parking lot or how many units residential structure is having that capacity to serve an electric vehicle charging in the future. Doesn't mean you got to install it today, but just have that electrical capacity there. And then the other end of it is permit, right? So you're requiring work, or people want to do this work. You got to have a pathway for folks to have it. And what we're finding out is, as we go throughout the country, is not too many municipalities actually have a pathway to a permit for EV charging. Atlanta has it under if you're doing major electrical work for an AC, the same type of permit, which makes it confusing for a lot of developers to go through this process. So I think cities navigate this, thinking about what that looks like to get a permit for this work. They come with a checklist so people can knock off things and know what they're doing. They come with an online portal for people to submit documents to, where there could be an online tracking system. And then other things such as we talked about residential chargers being not anything more than the power requirements of the laundry machine. And so sometimes classifying AC electrical work as minor, where permits approved in the same day. We've seen a lot of projects get delayed by months, just waiting on a permit. And it's never great to be waiting to put a shovel in the ground because of this industry. So that's something I think as cities and municipalities and counties go through this.
So our last bucket of questions, and then free for all on questions from the audience, is money. So I'm going to start with you, Mike, from Duke. Well, because I think you guys, this is sort of a specialized question that won't be applicable to most people in the room, but I think it's important for folks to understand of the utility side of things. What types of funding are available to you guys as utility companies to help ramp up the grid? Has that been an ongoing conversation? I know it's ongoing. Addie was here from Duncan's office, and I'm sure she'd love to hear this answer too. But what are you guys having to tap into for helping make sure the grid has the power that it needs for all of this?
Well, it's two things. One, I'm not aware, there's federal funding to help design things. I don't know how much more happening with that, to be honest, as far as bigger than EV. I've already went over and mentioned that we're trying to do, take the detail look about integrated resource planning, determine what our needs are. And we want to be very measured. To do any type of change is very, very expensive. And ultimately, the rate they pass, paying for that. And so we are mindful of that and don't want to go over because we want our rates to be competitive, and that's good for everybody and good for bringing businesses in and economic development. So you've got that aspect, you want to go over the cost, of these upgrades, on the infrastructure side, and then on the customer side, how do we go over and make it palatable for folks to go about this type of stuff? One of the things that we're looking at, right now, so how can we incentivize folks to charge their vehicles, at times of day? But certainly, we don't want everybody loading up the grid at the same time of day, 5 o'clock in the afternoon when it's hottest. Well, that's when the electricity is really expensive. If we can go over and incentivize folks to charge, say, between 2 and 6 in the morning, load the lowest, and the electricity costs are the lowest, that benefits everybody. And so there's software that's out there to go and help that. And so, we're working on that, that makes it cheaper for everyone.
And then Mike McCauley, money that I think most folks in this room can maybe them or their organizations can probably tap into at some level. But how can cities and counties or communities take action on their own to secure the funding for EV infrastructure?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, with respect to the infrastructure law, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which passed in November of 2021, that's the $1.2 billion law. There are dedicated programs, several of which y'all are already familiar, existing programs that budget parlance were plussed up. In many cases, the easiest way to think about how much they were increased is, in some cases, they were increased tenfold. They added a zero to the end of perhaps how much funding was available each grant cycle. So I'm talking about programs like LONA, right? For transit. And so obviously several public transit authorities regularly pursue those funds, and some aggressively so. So to give you one example, CARTA down in Charleston has a plan for electrifying their entire fleet of buses. And so as they continue applying for LONA dollars, they are not just pursuing a few $1 million to get a handful of buses, they're now adding zero behind their ass. And feds are increasingly, for worthy, well-planned projects, are increasingly avoiding those, particularly given the references earlier to Justice 40, which is the result of an executive order instructing federal agencies to have a game plan for how they're going to serve some of these resources to qualifying communities that are predominantly disadvantaged or underserved. And so for any local community, whether a community considers itself disadvantaged or not, you obviously want to consider any leg up you might have, anything you can do to make your project or application more competitive. And so that involves sort of telling that story and using data and combined with real life on the ground experiences to explain to the folks who are reviewing these federal grants why your project is better qualified than others. So there are programs like LONA that have been plussed up. There are also programs that have been created new out of whole cloth. So Bob and I both mentioned school buses here in South Carolina, and all of us that have been around, for more than 5 or 10 years know our sordid history of school bus speed issues, and great gains have been made over the years by our friends and colleagues at the State Department of Ed to improve our school bus fleet. And so under the immediate past and our new education superintendent, they are going all in on getting whatever federal funding they can, because the clean school and replace them with brand new buses typically, and with corresponding charging infrastructure. So they're not just saying, here's these bus type of plan, they're working with, in our case, the state, to develop infrastructure, to support those buses. South Carolina, I believe, was awarded more of those in the last funding cycle. They were all electric, and was awarded more buses than any other single public entity in the country. And those are going on a priority basis. The prioritization is set by the feds, but they're typically going to some of these rural school districts or school districts that have the greatest need or have the oldest and this earliest buses. And then, of course, as Rob has talked about NEVI formula, there is a couple sort of sister programs that can be sometimes generally referred to as NEVI competitive. There are two programs funded at $2.5 billion nationally to fund projects that fall or sit on alternative fuel corridors, which Rob is taught us all on the interstates. So the same criteria apply to them in terms of being within 1 mile of the interstate, having to have the same requirements as to the equipment. For that application, local governments are among those who are eligible to apply with a private partner who will operate and maintain those charging systems, just as Rob has explained, the state will have to do. And then similarly, there is a community charging program. And so that is one of the relatively few funding opportunities for communities to pursue, to have charging infrastructure paid for off the interstates or off of an alternative fuel corridor. The first round of that funding opportunity closed earlier this year, and last time I checked, the results have yet to be, what's that? Still haven't been announced. But there are some additional ways to skin the cat that I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about them briefly. Some are very big, and some are relatively small. The big ones include some of the funding opportunities for big multimodal, as Rob talked about earlier, projects of regional or national significance. One of the most popular of those programs, which is a USDOT program, is the RAISE program, formerly called Tiger Grants. And so, of course, with the RAISE program, there's sustainability is in the name. And so those kinds of projects can include funding for charging infrastructure. In fact, the only South Carolina project that won a RAISE award in the last cycle included charging infrastructure for vehicles and for bikes. And so that is going to accomplish multiple goals with a large significant project. Oftentimes they're multimodal and need to achieve multiple ends and increase safety and other deliverables. But at the same time, that's a way to get some funds for electrification. On a much smaller scale, the last program I'll mention is ECED, which is another mouthful of an acronym. Energy efficiency and climate block grants. These are, there was a formula program this year for the largest cities and counties in each state, as determined by the feds, to essentially indicate they want to pursue those funds and to tap in via a grant application or through a voucher program to get resources, or in other cases, resources to hire consultants so they get technical assistance. And those funds can be used very broadly. implementing them from developing a community energy plan or sustainability plan to, purchasing fleet vehicles, or installing charging infrastructure as examples on many energy efficiency, options. And, for those who qualify, those are, as far as federal funds go, fairly easy to happen. But again, those were only available to the bids, as I would say, this last round. However, the state, through the state energy office, was also applying for formula funds. And they will be running a sub-grant program for all the cities and towns, and counties who did not qualify for formula. And so the state energy office has developed their applications under review by the feds now. But I know, because I worked with them as they were considering options, that they are looking for ways to help make it easier for rural and smaller jurisdictions to, even if they're sticking their toe in water on electrification, to consider different applications of those funds. So stay tuned, hopefully at a future event, folks from the energy office to be able to talk about the program they're making available to a lot of communities that, a lot of us do.
Thanks, Mike. We'll open up for any questions. We got a couple minutes left. Yes, sir. And then,
I got a question. I don't know if it's the right question for you guys or not, but it's really not the infrastructure for charging vehicles. Kind of like Tesla, and then everybody else is kind of diving in out to the world. You're building stations that are Tesla stations, you're building stations that are cars, are the adapters. I'm not an EV person, I won't be until they're much more affordable. So either I'm making a lot more money or prices come down. But are they universal? The BMW and Ford and Chevy and Tesla all have different versions of the adapter. How much do those cost to work with some of the other stations you guys are trying to build? Yeah, so I can video first out of that. So, what I would say up until recently, it was like Apple. Every manufacturer that made a vehicle used was, like you mentioned, the CCS plug, combined charging station. And then Tesla was like Apple. They used their own proprietary plug that no one could get to except for Tesla. That has recently somewhat changed with some announcements in the last few months. We were talking earlier, Ford and GM had an announcement that they're now partnering with Tesla to deploy the NACS connector, the North American Charging Standard, as Tesla is calling it. There are a few important things that need to happen first. One being the Society of Automobile Engineers needs to standardize that connector, which will happen. How long it will take, we don't know. But currently, the only drivers that can use Tesla stations are Tesla drivers. But we foresee that changing in the next 2 years as auto manufacturers now move toward that connector standard. There will be adapters out there. It will be a little bit of, I think, a messy world in the middle for those years. Those adapters, currently are only proprietary to Tesla right now. So they cost a little bit of money, but again, if you buy any other car, you can use any other network. So we'll wait to see what that happens. But the manufacturers are moving toward one standardized connector out there. And to affordability, I'll say they're a whole range of vehicles. You get Bolt now for $19,000. You get a Hummer for $150,000, right? So there's a whole range. And there's a lot of different offers out there. So definitely take a look. But yeah, I would say there is a market standardization happening. It's going to take a few years. But I'll let Rob, I don't know if you want to touch on DOT.
Well, I'm old and I remember VHS and beta, Blu-ray, DVD. Right, so technology is evolving, and there is no standard right now, right? And that's part of being an early adopter for this type of technology. It has challenges, right? It comes to challenging when you jump into new technology earlier, but it's encouraging on the federal level to see them start to acknowledge NACS, because recently hearing about Ford and GM moving towards that NACS plug, that's going to provide them access to a Tesla network of chargers that's going to be very robust,
and very accessible. That also comes with challenges. Right now, Tesla customers are going to be competing with a Ford and a GM for those points whenever they get it. So, I agree with Ben totally. The market is going to figure this out. Private sector will figure this out, and they will standardize this one day. But I think there's also going to be a better way, constantly evolving to deliver a high amount of voltage in a very reliable compact manner. And that's one thing that the NACS Plug is just got very few moving parts. It's capable of delivering a lot of electricity, so it's starting to gain a little bit of popularity.
And we got 60 seconds.
Just 6
You got it?
Seconds, Mike Evans, Greenville Business Magazine, Columbia Business Monthly, Charleston Business Magazine. We sat down with the Tri-State Automotive Union, impressed to him. We said the board of EV and new planning for. He thought that EV, the early adopters had come into the market, sort of plateaued. So the Dems growth stats, 50% of the road. Well, that's now slowed down. And then the second question we was given was, what is next? We said there are other alternative fuel sources that they're exploring. So you guys exploring those as well?
Well, I'm gonna just touch on both those points. We're still seeing growth in EV registrations. So I don't feel like it's necessarily reached that point where it has plateaued. Certainly car manufacturers and car dealers have a different perspective than we do, but in terms of statewide registrations, it's still going upward in a big way. And we don't see that going away. What was your second question?
Are you also exploring?
Oh, hydrogen. Yeah, we're not exploring about hydrogen, compressed natural gas. Those are still valid forms of alternative fuels, and hydrogen it's very popular. It's a lot of money being put towards it by some very heavy hitters in the market. Toyota has not abandoned hydrogen by any means, and there are hydrogen hubs popping up around the country. So, if electricity and petroleum are not the only two shows in town when it comes to transportation. And once again, I think the market and the private sector is going to figure this out, and something is going to start to elevate up. But one funny thing that I was told at a meeting one time is that our infrastructure fueling is going to look like a yard dog's breakfast bowl for a while. Okay, so it's a big hodgepodge of stuff, right? It's going to be diesel, it's going to be gasoline, electricity, hydrogen, compressed natural gas. All these different things are going to be kind of in this soup, and it's probably going to stay that way for a while, right? It's not going to become one overnight.
Okay. To your comment about market, I'll say last year when I bought my EV, 0.9% interest on the loan. Now it's 6.5% if you bought. So I would say there's a lot of market factors out there that are affecting it. And before this role, before the EV industry, I worked for the energy office, larger alternative fuel role. And I think hydrogen has a lot of potential in the industrial sectors. You see a lot of manufacturing operations starting to use hydrogen to reduce emissions and increase efficiency.
All right, this year.
And one other last thing, with respect to funding and other alternative fuels. So many of the federal programs that I mentioned earlier also include funding opportunities for things like hydrogen, CNG, and so on. And we also, these reference some major economic development announcements. Of course, Bosch, Anderson increased their investment is their first U.S. get across on that sector, but they hydrogen related facility. So other alternative fuels are part of this.
Well, thank you all for being here today, and thank our panelists. This was great. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. We'll send this out since you registered. We'll send it out on your emails. Feel free to enjoy some refreshments and networking. Thanks, y'all.